I'm doing that, don't worry about it.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to NearFest Live and NearFest Worldwide via Zoom. I hope lots of people are watching this online. My name is Mr. Mike, W1RC. I am the benevolent dictator of NearFest. It gives me great pleasure to present this town meeting of the three candidates for the position of ARRL Director for the New England Division. Without further ado, I will turn the proceedings over to the moderator, Mitch Stern, W1SJ. Thank you. Good luck to the candidates.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm W1SJ, and I run the forums program here at NearFest, and I'm also the moderator for today's candidates forum. So, the ground rules. The candidates will go up in order, left to right, your left to right, and they will have 5 minutes to talk about themselves, background, what they believe in, whatever it is they need to talk about, as long as they behave and don't kind of say bad things about each other or about me. And some of them may be showing something on the screen, so we'll see that. We'll dim the lights for that. Then when we are done with that, I will ask questions that have been submitted to me, and the questions will be given to each candidate in turn, and we'll actually shift it by one each time, so one guy doesn't always get the first question. And they will have 2 minutes to give us an answer. Now, at 2 minutes, 15 seconds before the 2 minutes is up, I'm going to say time. That means you got 15 seconds. Okay? At the end of the 2 minutes, the microphone goes off, and it looks something like this. Now, if you read lips, that's perfectly fine, but most of the people don't read lips, so yes, the microphone goes off. Now, we're not heartless individuals. We have a program called Lifelines. If you think that you're knocking it out of the park and you want extra time, you can say, extra time, please. And we'll give you an extra 30 seconds on top of the 15 warning. But you only get one lifeline, so use it wisely. Any questions from anyone on how we're going to do this? Now, the other thing is that a lot of questions, you got to understand what a director does. A lot of people don't. And I can tell you from experience, when I was a section manager many years ago, and I always would get these phone calls asking me to do things that there was no way I could do, like, can you fix the ARRL? No, I can't. It says, I can appoint official bulletin stations, and I give my phone number out so you can complain to me about stuff. These guys can fix the ARRL, but they can't fix stuff outside the ARRL necessarily, right? So they are legislators that you're elected. They can't give executive orders, so think about that when the question is being asked. Some guy asked me once, can you fix that mess on 3850, all that bad language? I says, yes, I can. On the lower left of your radio is a little button, push it in once, and it goes away, it's magic. But that's really all I can do. So you got to keep that in mind that whoever we elect as director, they're in a legislative body of 15 directors, and they have to get 7 guys to kind of march with them. That's really how policy gets done at the American Radio Relay League. So some of the questions I may frame so that we all understand what it is they're answering, and they don't have to use their 2 minutes up explaining why this doesn't work. We all set to go? Gentlemen, yes?
Your written instructions in advance, 10 minutes.
Did it say 10? Do you need 10?
I made a 9-minute presentation.
Okay, we can go 10, sure. These people sit here longer, whatever, but if you so inspire them, yeah, I thought we'd speed it up a little bit, but if you're all set with that,
I'll talk fast.
I'm fine with 10. Anyone else with any questions, issues, or whatever? So, gentlemen, I ask you to come to your places, and please do stand in back where your name is, so we don't confuse the heck out of everybody.
I'll leave that there.
Leave that. Okay.
I'm speaking.
Are we ready to begin? You ready to begin?
Sure.
Okay.
The camera on?
Camera's on. Tom Frenay, K1KI, candidate for ARRL, New England Division Director. Go ahead, Tom.
Okay, thanks, Mitch, and thanks to all of you who have come here this afternoon. I'm Tom Frenay, K1KI. I live in Connecticut, right near Springfield, Massachusetts, and been a ham since I was 14, a few years ago, and have enjoyed ham radio in different ways over 50 plus years. I'm running for ARRL director because I decided that I was not satisfied with how things have been going the last 3, 4, 5 years. And rather than complain about it, I figured I'd step forward again and announce my candidacy. And it's in the end up to you who you elect for director. I think we have 3 interesting candidates. They're all good in different ways. I like to think of myself as having more experience and in working, both in my time working at ARRL, I've been in the contest program there for 4 years, and in serving on the ARRL board, which I was on for better than 25 years. The last 5 years have been difficult for ARRL because the long-term CEO, K1ZZ, retired in 2016, and the board has had a difficult time finding a good replacement CEO. The first 2 CEOs that were hired lasted less than 2 years each. I was on the board when those 2 were selected, but I will tell you that I did not choose to select the individuals that were eventually hired. I didn't think they were a good fit, but it's in the ARRL board, it's the majority that decides. And the current CEO, David Minster, NA2AA, has been there for about a year now, a little less than a year, and I'm reserving judgment on him as CEO because I've not seen it from the inside to really know what's going on. But I do have some worries. The current ARRL website has a list of 8 or 9, I think it's maybe 10 open positions. That's better than, at least 10% of the total staff count in Newington. And those open positions are very key positions organizationally. One is the IT manager, that's been open for a year and a half. One is the public relations manager, it's been open for a year and a half. And there's several others, including one that's not even posted for Chief Development Officer. So I'm worried that hiring is not happening quickly enough. I know there are some openings in the IT department as well as the IT manager. And there's some critical projects that are just not moving along organizationally to get the job done. So I'm very concerned about that. I don't know if the issue is the CEO. I don't know what the board has done the last couple of years to encourage the CEO to move quicker on filling those positions, but I think that's a very high priority to fill them. For instance, the PR manager position, having it open for a year and a half means that we haven't been even telling each other what's happening with amateur radio involvement in public service and other things to our own members. And secondly, we're not telling the public what's been going on within ham radio over the last year and a half well enough. So those are really key things that I think it's very important that the CEO focus on, and the board needs to focus on that as well to make sure that there's a good response from the CEO to those challenges. And I'm sure it's a challenge. It's not an easy time to hire people, but at the same time, we've got an organization that needs to run more efficiently and do both the public relations and IT work that's currently backlogged. So I don't have 10 minutes of presentation to give you other than to say I'm very interested in getting back on the ARRL board because I know I made a difference while I was there previously. I know I can make a difference working with the current board, and I want to make sure that the ARRL board focuses on the high-level issues that face ARRL, including spectrum protection, working with the FCC and Congress to get some of the proposals that ARRL and others have made to the FCC over the last 5 or 10 years that the FCC has not acted on. ARRL has, one of the issues has been on the FCC's desk for 8 years now. The FCC is a bureaucracy and is well known for being slow dealing with requests for changes, but waiting 8 years for something is way too long, and ARRL needs to be much more aggressive in dealing with the FCC or in dealing with Congress to encourage the FCC to get moving on some of those issues. So again, in addition to working with the board on strategic issues, I include working with Congress and working with the FCC because that's where amateur radio's future regulations come from. We need to make sure that amateur radio regulations are modern, they meet what current needs are for an amateur radio service that prospers. So I'll just leave with you that thought that working with the CEO, working on strategic issues, and particularly working with the FCC and Congress is the top priority. There are lots of other things that need to be done, but the board needs to focus on those high-level ones. And look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next is Fred, K1VR. I'm not going to use the first names, I'm going to use call signs because we have multiple Freds. So K1VR, go ahead, you have 10 minutes as soon as you start speaking. Well, you want to pop your thing on first?
I hit the share screen, and now I don't see. Where's the file?
Desktop. On the desktop, in the folder.
On the desktop in the folder. What's the folder called?
Is your name call sign?
I see only Zoom.
Go to the desktop. You're inside that PDF. It's a refresher. There you go.
Full screen.
What I did on my vacation.
Okay. Thank you. I'm Fred Hopengarten, K1VR, and I thought I'd use my time to tell you what I did over my summer vacation. So one of the things I did was I published a book, the third edition of my book on antenna zoning, published in cooperation with the ARRL. I managed to get a motion through the board in July to change the way we manage the money of our $40 million approximately endowment, which is that it will now go from being handled by one man who was the treasurer, and that's the way it's been for 40 years, to stop the clock. Okay. Like the NFL, give me back 30 seconds.
Were you going to bring the 6-foot stick to measure first downs in here?
Doesn't look like the screen sharing is working correctly. So they never saw the first line. Not that I can tell.
good online.
Is that what's on the air?
Yeah, it's on the air.
Okay, great. My opening slide, what I did over my summer vacation, I published a book, and I went to the board with a motion to change from management by the treasurer to management by professional investment managers. I also spent hundreds of hours working on a bill which is going to be dropped any day now, I hope, in front of the Congress, because you never want to get out in front of your sponsor. We haven't released the language yet. I hope to be able to do that fairly shortly. One of the other things I did over this summer was I discovered that the standing orders of the board of directors had all been created by minutes of the board, therefore they were public, but as a collection they were not public. They were behind some sort of secrecy screen available only to officers, directors, and vice directors. And I published them. They're on nediv.arrl.org, or email me and I'll be happy to send you a copy. First, I published them in the chronological order in which they were created, and then, with the help of K1DCA, we reorganized and published them again subject by subject matter. I also created a 6-part webinar for the ARRL's Lifelong Learning Series, which is available on the ARRL webpage and goes right through the process from beginning to end on what you need to do if you need an antenna permit. I appointed a replacement for W1UE who resigned to the Contest Advisory Committee. That person is now N2WQ, who's also HQ9X. I obtained a permit for 2 Roan 45 antennas in Milford, New Hampshire for NN1SS, a widely known digital and RT2Y operator. And then in Massachusetts, I received a decision from the land court on behalf of KD1MF in Framingham, Massachusetts, and the tower is now up right over that 273 Prospect Road sign. And my hero, Misha Filipov, KD1MF, is actually here at Deerfield today, buying more parts for his station. Also, I ran for office this summer. This is what I looked like when I was in the lot greeting people at the Ham Expo in Marlborough, Massachusetts. And basically that's just what I did this summer. These are your instructions on how I hope you'll vote. And I was going to ask you just one more question. What is the difference between a Yankee Stadium hot dog and a Fenway Frank? And the answer is, you can buy a Fenway Frank next week. So, in playing to the hometown crowd, because all of you voters are New Englanders, I also hope the Red Sox will do well tonight in their first game. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Okay, slide the laptop one bit to the right.
And you get to play the game.
Yeah, see if you can do this well.
Why don't you bring it up? I'm going to go ahead and get started since it doesn't look like the computer's our friend today.
Well, hold on, let him do that. So
Yeah,
All right.
let me do this because no one's on the camera right now. So all right. Get used to all the little glitches of this. A couple times in a row, you know.
Okay, see it online.
Very good. Now
You're good to go?
Now I'm going to turn the camera
Good to go. Start speaking.
All right. I'm Fred Kemmer, AB1OC from Hollis, New Hampshire. And I'm the third candidate for ARRL Conclusion Director. And let's see here, where he is. All right. So what I'm trying to do is focus on some big issues that I think will make a difference on a lot of fronts for people, both for the ARRL, for the future of amateur radio, And quite frankly, while these aren't the only things that are important, they're fundamental things that if we address them well, they'll help us attack a lot of issues. So top of my list, we need to bring new people to amateur radio. We need to get the people who are already licensed, active, and on the air. Did you know that less than 25% of the people who are in technician license will become active hams? And what happens to the other 75%? And what does that mean to participation in our hobby and to participation in the ARRL? It's very important that we get the ARRL focused and we get all of you, clubs, section, and field volunteers, everybody in New England focused on this problem, because it's a big deal. Secondly, we've had a lot of concern about losing privileges for putting up antennas, losing bands, and we've had some great legislation written. Can anybody think of anything that got passed that made any real difference? Anybody? I can't think of one. And the reason for that is pretty simple. And by the way, it's not a flash in the pan, it's a trend unless we take a different approach. I spent time on the FCC, I spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C. influencing the executive branch. Let me tell you what moves legislation. Money and votes. Pure and simple. So let's look at money. All the telecom providers in North America in 2019 spent $67 million last year. Half of that roughly was spent by Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile. The folks, by the way, who are after our spectrum. $32 million. Even if the money that the ARRL had were not earmarked for other purposes, and we could spend it all, in 18 months the ARRL would be bankrupt if we try to lobby our way through this. So that's not the answer. It's important, but it's not going to get the job done. What will get the job done is public support for amateur radio. That's why the PR position that Tom talked about is so important, I believe. And it's also why it's so important that we do work in public places, in schools, and other places where we can make folks aware again of what amateur radio is, why it's important to our future, how it supports emergency communications, and the many other benefits that it brings. So let's talk a little bit about communication. You know, we had people get elected last time based on the fact that they were going to improve communications. And what got improved? We talked more about what we did after we did it and why. We published some of the work that we do. In my book, Real Communications, is more about using this than using that. You need to be listening to people. You need to find out what's on folks' minds, and you need to be prepared to act on it. I've already held 2 town hall meetings that are New England-wide, but anybody who has an opinion or a question about the ARRL or amateur radio can attend. If you elect me your director, that would be the first 2 of many town hall meetings where we continue to do that. And we're going to take that input and we're going to use that to drive what I do and what we talk about and work on in our cabinet meetings. And then lastly, I think that just looking at the director job as solely being focused on the insides of the ARRL is an opportunity missed. Okay, that's important. There's a lot of the operations of the league that needs to be fixed. But beyond that, the director also has an opportunity by working with the field volunteer staff, club presidents, and all of you to start programs here in New England that will actually solve some of these problems. And you know what? Sometimes that's a better way of doing things than waiting for a committee and the board to do it. It doesn't listen to the membership very well. It doesn't disclose what it's doing until after it's done. Okay? It's not an either or. Both are important. We have to make both work. But a lot can get done by all of you. Some of you probably have seen me at club meetings in the last 3 months. I think I've attended 33 now. Club meetings trying to get some of this activity going in amateur radio clubs across the room. And I know from my experience that we can solve problems that way, create some great, not only New England programs, but nationwide programs as well. You can't tackle the full range of issues that a director should be expected to tackle by yourself. You need a team of people that represent all the different things that people want to do with amateur radio. So I want to introduce you briefly to my team. Bill Temple is the vice director, has been the person that got me into this race and has been coaching me on the operation of the ARRL. Bill's very knowledgeable on that topic. Corey Golub, traffic handler and assistant section manager in Maine. I'm Larry Crayson, a very prominent president here in New England of a major club. Rob Macedo, Mr. Skywarm, and Aries here in New England, very notable in emergency communications. Marcia Ford, probably the most noted and recognized traffic handler here in New England. Rob Leiden, lots of experience as section manager and club president. Ray LaJoy, the current Western Mass section manager. And Jack Ciacia, who has lots of experience from the Colorado section and work in ARRL, recently joined us here in New England. We spend time every single day on Slack discussing issues in the ARRL. We've been doing this every day for the last 4 months since I got in this race, trying to sort out what good policy to solve some of these problems look like. I'm not going to try to do this all myself. I'm going to rely on the people in New England who have the expertise in some of these areas to give me good guidance on what I need to do and what I need to work on. So, for those of you who don't know me, my background is 3/4 of my working career I've been a corporate executive. Most of those roles have involved doing two things: running big businesses and doing strategic planning. I did particularly the latter work for about the last third of my career for Lucid Technologies, which is a multi-billion-dollar company. So let me tell you a little bit about what it takes to be a good executive and how this really goes. When you get an important job, you have about 100 days to prove you can do it. And if you don't get it done, they'll get somebody else. You get replaced. That's what the real world looks like. I think the directors are pretty damn important jobs. And if I get chosen for this job, I felt like I should put up a 100-day commitment to all of you on what I'm going to get done in the first 100 days that I'm in office. So what does that look like? Outreach to every single director and leader. I've already begun that process. Communication that's about listening to all of you and acting on your input, as well as being candid about what's going on inside the board process. I'm going to be appointing 4 assistant directors to focus on the key areas that are some of the priorities I laid out: new ham development, emergency communications and public service, work in schools, and just generally anything we can think of to work on protecting our spectrum and our rights as hams. And then lastly, it's very important to be involved with all of you on a regular basis. You know, some candidates sometimes in elections, you hear a lot from them when there's an election, when they need your vote, and then they kind of disappear. So the next election, okay? I don't believe that's a good way to do business, and so part of my commitment is to be involved with at least 6 club meetings or groups every quarter, and I'm going to expect every single one of my assistant directors to do the same. That's how you do effective listening and communicating, and that's how you have a basis to act. So with that, and wrapping up here, you know, I believe that your director can get a lot of important things done. I've spent the last 5 years of my life doing almost nothing but working on these problems. Any of you who care to check out my track record will find plenty of evidence in it. None of this is new. And you know, one of the questions I get a lot is, so Fred, why are you doing this? Well, I'll tell you honestly, until some of the folks in this room approached me, I had no thoughts of becoming a director. But what convinced me to do it was something very simple. It's what's motivated me for all the work I've done on amateur radio. I grew up in a poor family, with parents, neither of whom finished high school. I would have never had the opportunity to leave anything anywhere if it had not been for an uncle who involved me in amateur radio at an early age. It changed my life. Everything that came after that, at least somewhat, was rooted in that simple outreach on his part. Get me involved. You know, I've talked to a lot of people here in New England, and a lot of folks have that same story in them. Amateur radio changes lives. And that's what makes it worth doing, and that's what makes worth protecting and growing. I've committed myself in retirement to do everything I can to make that experience happen for other people. I've spent a lot of time doing it, and I get to the point where we're getting some things really done. As your director, I think I can do more, and I hope you'll give me that chance.
Thank you, Fred. Okay, now we have the lights back on, we can all see one another. It's time for the question and answer part of the program. So we're going to start with K1KI and go across this way. And the first question comes from 2 different people. It comes from Alex AK1MD, who asks, what will you do to protect our bands from increasing QRN? He also said QRM. I don't think he meant QRM. QRN in the future. And a similar question came from Mr. Mike, W1RC, that character you saw here earlier, who says, what will you do to convince the other directors to establish and maintain a central database of contact information for the responsible parties at the various power utilities? And that was based off of an article in QST a month or two ago. So, Tom, please take it away.
Okay. The issue of RFI and power line noise and noise from solar panels and consumer electronics is a pretty significant one for most hands. Unless you're at the end of a mile-long driveway or private road, everybody hears their neighbors in some fashion, or your power line noise or whatever. ARRL has been pretty effective in the lab with measuring and documenting problems and sending them to the FCC and trying to get the FCC to take any action at all. And the FCC has pretty much not done anything over the years. I can go into a lot of detail, but the real problem has been that the ARRL hasn't figured out how to get the FCC to take the next step, which is not only to acknowledge problems, but try to deal with and fix them. There have been virtually no changes in the regulations related to RFI over quite a number of years. They're in many cases very out of date, and there are hundreds of millions of new devices out there that can cause problems to neighbors. Just dealing with the solar panel interference has been a difficult time. The lab did a good job of nailing down.
Time. 15 seconds left.
15 seconds left. Nailing down the problem and working with the manufacturer on some of the systems, but it's still a very difficult problem that the FCC has not stepped up on.
Thank you, Tom. Fred, same question.
Thank you. Full disclosure, AK1MD is one of my clients. I didn't put him up to this question, and I'm totally surprised by the question. That is, I'm not surprised by the essence of the question. I'm surprised that he submitted the question. As to the rising noise floor, this is a problem that's nationwide, and our military is bothered by it. All communicators are bothered by it, generally speaking. And it's a very difficult problem because we have lots of new devices that are being brought into the marketplace, some better obeying the inadvertent radiator rules than others. As for getting the FCC to take action, that's an incredibly difficult problem because over the past 15 years, they've withdrawn field monitoring stations and reduced the size of their engineering staff. Not only that, but the previous chief engineer has now retired, and he actually knew something about communications issues. But at the moment, the FCC is somewhat stymied. They have no chairman. The President of the United States has not appointed a new chairman, even though he's been in office since January. And the only thing that happens then is that controversial issues will go through the FCC. If it's a controversial issue in any way, or there's a fight between constituencies, it's going nowhere at the FCC today. But on how the ARRL can take action, you have to get 8 votes. You have to be cooperating with other members of the board.
Time.
And it doesn't really matter what you're being told by New Englanders. It's the board that has to take the action, and you need the cooperation of your other board members.
Thank you.
Right?
Fred.
So, first of all, the source of these noise problems are manifold. While the ARRL lab has done some work to submit data to the FCC, what they haven't done is they haven't made that data available to all of you, so when you have a noise problem, you understand what you're dealing with and know where to go, where to begin to solve it. I think that should get fixed. I think that's an action that doesn't need a whole board effort to do. That's a decision the CEO and the folks up on the left could make in a heartbeat. Second thing, I would like to, across New England, establish teams of people who have the necessary equipment and the expertise to track down noise to help you. That would be an example of one of those division-wide projects that I'd like to create. There is grant funding available. Some of it's already been used for this purpose in other divisions that we could use to get the equipment here and create teams of people who would help us track those problems down. Thirdly, and this is the easy one to solve, we will build a list of who to contact for RFI problems from power company contacts, and we will put that on the division website. That will happen the first day of NOS. Okay? So I don't buy that the ARRL can't do anything. I also really don't buy that the people in New England can't do anything about this. And you know what? If we do a successful job of establishing an effort here that will help people actually solve these problems, I'll bet you other divisions will pick it up too. I don't think we necessarily need a board action to do that, although it might be helpful, and we'll certainly try and get one. But see, part of the problem we have is that we're relying too much on closed committees and everything inside the board, and not enough effort on trying to solve some of these problems ourselves. New England's a big place. If we solve a problem with an effective solution, then other folks will follow our suit.
Thank you. This next question comes from Jack, W1WEF, and he asks, how do we protect our CW band segments from infringement by the very popular digital modes, especially with new digital operators? And we'll start with K1VR.
Hello, Jack. He's also a member of the Yankee Clipper Contest Club. I'm a charter member of that club. In any event, as to the band segments, there's a complete and underlying issue, which is that the FCC at the staff level doesn't really want to have band segments. So we run into a problem. They don't want to do what many amateurs want to be done. Their view is that around the world, there is no band segmentation, and the amateurs work it out. I'm of the view that we can do a little bit of both. We can be working things out on our own. But it's also a problem to ignore the digital modes because they are so vastly popular across the United States. If you look at the number of FT8 contacts versus the number of single sideband or FM contacts in places like Clublog, to give you some quantification, you'll discover that the idea of preserving band and preventing the encroaching of digital may have the question wrong. We've got to figure out how to share these things, but I'm not going to be on board with hampering the development of digital things because I think that's what interests a lot of our newcomers to the hobby, including the adults who come in at midlife and the youth who want to join early on.
Thank you, Fred. AB1OC, same
All right,
question.
so I basically agree with your position on this one, Fred. You know, there's published data. I think the league came out with this about a year or so ago, that some 65 to 70% of all Q-tip games submitted to the logbook of the world are FTAs. So you're not going to make something that better than half the amateur radio operators in the United States and those who are using the logbook outside the United States want to do. That's just not going to happen. I do think we need a sensible band plan, and that probably needs to be looked at and resegmented appropriately so that we have the right amount of space available for the things that people want to do. I also am not a fan of just opening the band up and letting it create a free flow. I don't think that's a good idea for any mode, especially. For one thing, people will not have as much success making contacts in any mode as we do. But what else can we do? You know, I work with a lot of new hams who started out with FTA, and they grow tired of them pretty quickly. It gets boring. You work everything you can work. You get your DXC or your work all states or whatever it is you're there to do, and then it becomes kind of meaningless. Okay, so what can we do? It's all back to memory. Are we really helping people to learn CW? Are we really helping people to put up better HF stations so they can do sideband effectively, or they can do CW effectively and make those same contacts? And again, I think that comes back to that first fundamental thing that I put up there, which is how do you get new people in the hobby, and more importantly, how do you mentor them to get them active and on the air and make great hands on it? If we invest more effort in helping folks become confident and build stations that will support some of these other modes, we will find that balance will tip the other way. And I can tell you from the new folks that they do get bored with FT8 and they're interested in learning CW. It helps them, and they're interested in building better stations if they can just find somebody who will help them do it.
Thank you, President. Tom?
Could you read the question again?
How do we protect our CW band segments from infringement by the very popular digital modes, especially with new digital operators?
Okay. So I know Jack W1WEF pretty well, and he's a dyed-in-the-wool CW operator, as some people might describe me from time to time. CW is allowed on every frequency we have access to. So it's interesting that he's wondering how to protect that spectrum from digital modes. And it's really a question of what do we do to accommodate the growth in activity in something other than CW. And yeah, digital modes are certainly increasing, and that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. But CW operators have the option of operating anywhere they want within our allocation. So he's got more freedom than the digital modes do to move on a band. So I don't think you can, it doesn't seem reasonable to protect something that already can use the whole band from something that uses only part of the band. So I guess I would tell Jack that he should turn the VFO and operate in a different section of the band. But it really is an issue for all of us because we all share the bands and none of us owns a particular frequency. We all have to be able to move around and adjust as conditions change, whether it's somebody else operating or it's QRM or propagation changes. That's part of the deal, is learning how to operate when the conditions change. So I don't think we're going to see much progress in what he's asking for.
Thank you, Tom. All right, the next question comes from Richard WA1SKQ. He asks, how will you address the lack of diversity, age, gender, and race in the ham radio community? So I'm going to frame this one now so you guys understand this. And it's kind of like, well, we got to ask the diversity. Ham operators are bad because, well, think about this a minute. I operate a lot on CW, not as much as some of these guys, but I do quite a bit. I do contesting. I operate on FT8 quite a bit. On FT8 and CW, your gender, your race, and your everything else is irrelevant. You don't know what the other person is. You have no idea. I remember as a novice working somebody by the name of Marty, a woman. I didn't know that until I got the QSL card. And the other thing about diversity, we are the most diverse hobby on the planet. I can prove it to you. I work DX mostly. The people who I'm talking to do not speak English as their primary language. And south of the US, they're pretty much mostly Hispanic, and a lot of them are people of color. People on the West Coast are working Asians mostly. So we're pretty diverse. Now, yeah, if you're a technician, you're kind of working people around here. But at any rate, understand what we are talking about. So now I'm going to shoot it right over to Fred 81OC to handle that one. And we'll see what he has to think about that.
All right, thank you, Nick. You know, this one is pretty personal for me. I've spent a lot of time in classrooms with young people. I get to see what the next generation of hams look like every single time I do that. I'm in 5 different schools teaching classes for credit in 2. Amateur radio in the classroom for classroom credit. So let me tell you what this looks like. When I see a group of folks who show up to elect to learn about amateur radio, half of them are young women. Another quarter are not white males, they're minority students, and the rest looks like most of the people, in this room. Okay? That's what your next generation of amateur radio operators are going to look like, folks. And so, how do we look to them? Do the leaders and the movers and shakers in the ARRL look like them? Do we have that mix? Well, let me give you a little secret. If we don't, we're going to have a heck of a time attracting those people. So how do you do that? Another good place where we can work inside the division to do some of the right stuff, and the league needs to focus on this as well. How many of you are in a club in New England? How many of you have a female or a minority on your board? A few do. Okay, great. You're probably already ahead of the game. We need a heck of a lot more of that kind of cultivation there. And you know what? Find a young lady who's interested in amateur radio, put her on your board, listen to her. That's what we did. And you know what? When we had ideas for youth programs, she did a very good job of telling us when we're on the right track and when our heads were in the wrong place. Okay? That's invaluable to you. That's how you're going to build that kind of leadership structure that's going to help us attract those people. And you know what? We need to ask the same question about the staff at the ARRL as well, because it's just as important there as it is here.
Thank you, Fred. I guess the question you asked is how many have a board in their club who has a member under the 60 years of age?
Raise your hands.
I can't put mine.
Thank you. Good work, folks. Good work.
Tom, go ahead, please.
Okay, 6 or 7 years ago, when I was director, I actually offered a motion to the ARRL board to provide some resources to improve diversity within amateur radio. And the thought behind that was the ARRL needed to put some programs or funding together to reach out to communities that we hadn't reached out to in the past, and try some experiments to see what we could do with some communities that we were not used to involving ourselves in. Because usually what happens is different clubs around the country, they kind of do what they've always been doing. And the idea was to put some more resources into reaching out and trying to see if we can do better at attracting a more diverse universe of people into ham radio. But what I learned from that was having the board pass a motion doesn't accomplish anything unless the board manages its own affairs by following up with the CEO, approving a budget that actually includes what the board has passed as policy. And the board did not do that in this case. And no money, no funds were put forward, no programs were added in the next couple of years. And the board didn't manage that and hold the CEO accountable for it. So part of the answer here is that it can't happen without a board that's willing to make something happen. And that applies not only to diversity, but to anything. The board does not track, the current board does not track very well, if at all, the motions that it makes and the policy that it sets to make sure that jobs are actually done when the board votes to do it. So if the board votes to create a committee to do so-and-so, normally that committee gets appointed. But normally that committee's report back to the board never meets the deadlines that are set in the first place. And the board itself, and it was the case when I was on the board too, it was very hard to follow up and get everybody to pay attention to what was supposed to happen and measure whether it did happen. So again, diversity is tough, but it's as tough as a lot of other things involving ARRL resources. You have to have a board that functions well, you have to have a CEO that functions well, and you have to have a way to measure and hold people accountable. Thank you.
Fred?
I think it's a terrific question because if you're going to change the complexion of the league, you've got to spend some money to try and do it. And that's what was behind my investigation into the management of the endowment of the league. When I looked at this first at the end of 2019, we were at 38.5% invested in equities and the rest invested in fixed income. Anybody know what fixed income is paying these days? Next to nothing. So as a result, we didn't have new money that we could spend on projects like diversity. And what I had in mind was that we would go much more into investments that would yield more money that we can spend on them and fund the things we want to fund. And as far as the work I did on that, I brought it in on time. We started with a motion in January. A new manager will be named as per the original motion in January. It is coming in on time. It will yield more money, and that's how we can fund the outreach programs that are necessary to accomplish a change in diversity of the league as it stands at the moment.
Thank you. I liked your answer at the last thing where you said, if you want a question about diversity, ask 3 old white guys.
I did say that.
I was rolling on the floor. Okay, very good. Our next question comes from a character by the name of Mitch, W1SJ, who asks this. You have some problems there, Ben?
I'm just trying to figure out what's going with this.
Okay. The ARRL board is made up of 15 directors, and consensus is required to form policy. Please give us an example, one, of how you marshaled support for an idea in the past, whatever board you were on, and then in the future, looking forward, how you would build consensus for your ideas once you are an ARRL director. Okay, we'll start with Tom.
The way I approach trying to get something before the board and approved is to do a lot of research on it. As an example, one of the committees I served on was called the Entry-Level License Committee, like 5 years ago. And we spent a lot of time within the committee, after it was appointed, talking to each other, getting some ideas. But one of the most important things we did was a survey of ARRL members. We decided that we had some ideas, we thought they were good, but nothing is better than getting a lot more eyes on your ideas to see if, what your assumptions are and what you think the community understands about the issues are in sync. So we did a survey of ARRL members. We expected to get maybe 1,200 responses. Within 2 days, we had 1,500 responses. Within a month, we had 8,000 responses. So my conclusion from that is that ARRL members like to be asked and like to give input. And if you do that on the topic and do a good job of it, you'll get enough to make you think hard about your original assumptions. You'll make your proposal to the full board a much more solid document. You have to write it up carefully. You have to detail your reasoning, and you have to present it to the board with enough time so that they can digest it. But you also have to give the board some options. You can't just say, here's the way it's going to go, and expect that the board will just sign right on to it.
Time.
So I have 15 seconds left, or is that it?
You got 15 seconds.
15 seconds, okay. So the bottom line is, give the board some options, let them decide, and you can help steer that through your own comments and your own input. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Fred?
Well, the question has to do with an idea that you had in the past and how did you act on it. The idea I've just been talking about, which was to change the management of the $40 million endowment of the ARRL, was all my own idea. It came to me out of reading the back pages of the annual report, and I put together an 8-page, single-spaced backgrounder for members of the board 2 months before the actual January meeting. Then I worked the board by calling people up and asking what they thought about the ideas. Changed the proposal, accommodated their ideas, and I kept remembering that the magic number at the board is 8. You've got to have yourself, and 7 people have to go along with you. And the way you get the 7 people to go along with you is to make sure that they have buy-in. They reflect, what you are putting forward reflects their ideas as well. I worked informally with them on this investment management idea. And after 40 years of doing it one way, we changed to the idea I was putting forward. As I recall it, it was a unanimous vote because of all this background work done in advance of the January meeting of the board. And it was unanimous for the change that I was proposing. That's how I did it in the past. That's how I'll do it in the future.
Thank you, Fred.
Okay.
Fred?
I've had quite a bit of experience with this. I served on an industry board called ADIS. It's basically made up of all the telecom operators in the United States, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, cable companies, everybody's on there. And all the telecom vendors across the world, including the Chinese. Okay? Now, I would tell you that getting consensus in a group like that to do anything to change the competitive landscape in that industry is pretty tough work. It's not easy to do. My job was to work with those people and create an agenda they would all agree to and work on projects. It was called the Talks Council. I was chairman of it for multiple years. And when I retired, I was good enough at it that they kept me on as a consultant for 2 years to keep doing it. Okay, so let me tell you how this really has to work. Boards are made up of people. And all the board members and leaders that vote have issues that are important to them. And you begin by spending time with those folks and getting a deep understanding as you can of what those issues are. And then you start to look for common ground that you can begin to bring people together on an issue and work on it. And you know what happens when you do that is you start to get progress around that issue, and the issue that people share become as important as their personal interests. And that's how you get them to work together and build success. Okay? Secondly, it doesn't necessarily all have to be done inside the board. You know, a great example, we've started some very effective mentoring programs, something called Ham Boot Camp, which is now a nationwide program. As of this fall, 850 people in just about every state in the United States have gone through it. We created it here in New England. We got folks to collaborate and make it work. The league picked up on it and endorsed it. If you got your ARRL mailing, you saw it. November Boot Camp announced again. You saw it QST. So some of these problems can get solved inside committees by building consensus, something I've already begun working on. But you can also get a lot of things done by getting all of you to solve the problem and bring the solution to the ARRL to something that's already working. It just needs their support to go forward. When somebody has a good working program and something as big as a division, it's working. It's pretty hard to argue with, not to back down, unless somebody's got a better idea.
Thank you. This next question comes from Rob, K1UI, who asks a really important question. How often should the director communicate with the section managers, and how should that happen? So we'll start with Fred, K1DR.
Is K1UI one of the people on your backing list? Yeah.
I didn't want to say that.
It's important that the audience knows it was a planted question. In any event, it's still a relevant question.
It is.
And that is that it's important to be in touch with the New England division, people who are helping do things throughout the division, feet on the ground, as it were. And frankly, I know that for myself, in the first 2 years and some months that I've been on the board, I was pretty much absorbed in figuring out how the board works in order to make things happen at the board level. And I invite anybody here to speak to other members of the board as to whether I was effective in working with those other members of the board. But I was not as effective in communicating with people in at the section level in New England. And I know that was a problem, and I apologize for it, and I'm going to make up for it.
Thank you. Fred?
All right. So first of all, for the record, it wasn't a planned question. I had no involvement in asking. All right. So how often do you need to talk to your field staff and the section manager, these are the people who volunteer to make the ARRL go in the division. My answer to that is simple: every single day. Every single day. It's the reason I built a team of those people to help me get ready to be your director. Those are the folks who are on the ground doing traffic handling, emergency communications, club coordination, public information work, and a whole raft of other functions that are critical to getting anything done by the ARRL. If you think the staff in Newington does all this stuff, you just need to go look at how the section structure actually works. Okay? Secondly, and the way, again, I've been doing that is I've got those folks, many of them already on my team. We're on a Slack channel every single day talking about issues that affect the league and all of you, and what's the best thing that we can think of to do about it. That's how my team will work on all that. Beyond that, it's very, very important to use the cabinet meeting process, which every director has the ability to do, to encourage those people to work together. If I become your director, there are 2 ARRL board meetings a year. Directors typically have 1 around each of those meetings, at least most of them. I'm going to have at least 4, because I think we need to be doing stuff together as a division more frequently than the ARRL has a board meeting, so that we're prepared to bring good solutions into those processes and also to solve problems here. So yeah, the field staff and the section managers are very, very important. You cannot get anything done in the division, in the field, without those people.
Thank you, Fred. Tom?
Okay, being the end of this question, the third one, I'm going to approach it a different way, and I would say that the job of the director and the job of the section manager are fairly different. Section managers' jobs are to manage volunteers in a variety of different areas that AB1OC mentioned, to work on volunteer programs within their section, like mentioning club coordination and traffic handling and areas and so on. But the director's job is not to do that job. The director's job is to work with the section managers on issues that are troublesome within the field organization, number one. But the director's job is to deal with policy issues. So they have to be, the director needs to be really a good listener. And some of that is done by having a regular meeting, as Fred also mentioned, around each board meeting and in between if necessary or if desired. You have to listen not only to section managers, but club presidents, and gather input on things that might be needed to be changed with, at the board level. But mostly the programs that the section managers deal with are already set up. There have been not enough resources to help the section managers and the section level leaders over the past at least 5 years. The important thing is to listen. I've got each section manager on my phone contact list, so I call at any point that I would need to. And I'm sure the other 2 gentlemen here have the same. So not every day, but regularly.
Thank you, Tom. Our next question comes from AB2BA, who asks, what is your position on FCC RM 11708, NPRM 16-239? Are you guys familiar with that?
Give us the cliff notes.
What?
Give us the cliff notes of what's in it.
It's about the baud limit for digital.
Got it.
Baud limit?
Yep.
Okay, so you guys can address it. Okay, we'll start with you, Fred.
Okay, great. So, what this is about, for those of you who don't know, is there's a notice of proposed rulemaker in action in the FCC about making the speeds that you can do with digital about bandwidth, not about symbol rates, which is the way this works currently. Okay? The reason that people want to do this is it will allow us to invent new digital modes for things like emergency communications and traffic handling that A, get around some of the high cost encumbrance of patents that currently hold back PACTOR, and some of the other digital modes that are commonly used, those that make that traffic handling job as a digital operator almost too expensive. Those modems, because of the IPR encumbrance, cost thousands of dollars. So one of the good things about doing this is it will open up new digital modes to be created that are effectively broader band from handling message traffic that don't get encumbered with expensive patents and makes the equipment hard to access. Secondly, it will encourage a lot of innovation. It'll encourage people to find new ways, which we've been doing in cellular for quite a few years now, of jamming more bits at faster rates into less and less bandwidth. So I think it's a good proposal. I do think it has to be used properly in a band plan segmentation so that if folks are experimenting with new digital modes, they're not doing it on top of other stuff that people want to do, like CW, or like the digital modes that others are practicing. But orchestrated properly, I think it's a good thing.
Thank you, Fred.
The question was for a position on RM 11708. The answer is I'm in favor of it, and I am a fan of regulating by bandwidth and not symbol rate. And I don't think there's a whole lot of controversy amongst the people I talk to about this particular subject matter. The controversy about the generalized subject has conflated two subjects: encryption and bandwidth. And despite tons of comments that have been filed on this issue, they're completely separate, and they should have relatively nothing to do with one another. And yet the comments do. Part of the result is we get back-channel feedback from the FCC that if the hams can't decide what they want to do, why are you asking us? Because what staff wants to do is basically rubber stamp something that there's widespread agreement upon at the league. Me, I'm in favor of the bandwidth, but it reminds me to mention that this is just one of many things which in ham radio is becoming more and more prevalent. We are not just AWCW, AM, CW, and sideband and FM anymore. We have a wide variety of hobbies, and the board has to concentrate more on paying attention to all of these new and different things that are happening. And I don't think we have in the past. And I look forward to working with Wireless Girl on this subject and with others who've been involved in these topics involving digital communications, as well as high-altitude balloons and all sorts of other things that are wonderful additions to our hobby.
Good timing. So, for any of you who came late and you have a really burning question you want to ask, we have time for one more, but you got to write it out. Whisper it to me. And I don't have any tape.
Mitch, I think you missed Tom on that.
Yeah, no, I'm just breaking in. And I don't have paper or pen, so we have to do it on your own. But
why do you require the questions to be written out?
We don't want people standing. That's the rule we decided.
Standing because of the virus situation?
Yeah, that and a number of reasons. Yeah. Okay, Tom, your answer as to RM 11708.
The short answer is, I think we're in violent agreement that we think the FCC should do what ARRL proposed. The problem is that the FCC did not do what the ARRL proposed. They came back saying, sure, we'll get rid of the symbol rate and let you use Factor 4 or whatever else. But they did not want to put a cap on the bandwidth of a digital signal. And the problem is that if you don't put a cap on the bandwidth of a digital signal, there's a genuine issue that the bandwidth could grow to be quite wide on some digital signals. And what ARRL proposed was a bandwidth essentially equal to a sideband signal, 2.7 or 2.9 or whatever the actual number was in the proposal. And the FCC didn't want to do that. So the ARRL reply comment said, good start, but it's really important that that bandwidth be capped because we just don't think it's going to be practical to have an unlimited digital bandwidth in HF. So this is the one issue that I mentioned early on in my opening that the FCC's been holding on to since 2013. We're 8 years later, and the FCC has asked for comment and got a lot of comment, but hasn't acted on it. And unfortunately, it's holding back technology within the U.S. Every other country allows Pactor 4, for instance. Every other country allows some of the more advanced digital modes that we can't use because of this antiquated rule. And what we need to do is pressure the FCC more, maybe go back to them with some clarifying information. I don't know what, but
Time.
we need to turn the pressure up. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Is anyone submitting any questions?
No, I'm kind of curious about something. You gave a 3-minute speech on a question, yet you won't let them
Okay,
ask a
you have
question.
a question, that's the only thing.
That's,
Okay,
I'm gonna
so-
finish.
No.
You gave a 3-minute speech, I'm only giving
Bert.
a 20-second speech. Done.
Done, thank you. Okay, this question, I came up with this question, and then I just got the same question handed to me by AA3HD about 20 minutes ago, showing that great minds think alike. The ARRL members of New England are truly blessed to have 3 of the best candidates for the ARRL board in all ARRL divisions, in my opinion. Unfortunately, when this is over, it's just like the playoffs, 2 of you get to go home. When you are elected director, how will you use or not use the skills and talents of the other 2 candidates to further promote the ARRL and amateur radio? Start with Fred.
Very simple. Doors open. My model is about collaboration. Yeah, I want to work with people. That's how I've been successful in everything that I've done. What I will say, though, is that my model is a little bit unusual, and I'll be the first to admit that. But you know, Henry Ford once said, if you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to get what you got. Are we happy with what we got? Are we getting the problem solved that hands need to get solved in New England? Are we getting the league where it needs to be? To the extent that these 2 or anybody in the division wants to work on some of the priorities that we laid out here and solve these problems, my door is open. The only thing I ask is that folks, in their heart, accept the mission of making amateur radio better and don't play politics.
Thank you, Fred. Tom?
I agree with the premise in the comment that led up to the question. I think we have 3 really good candidates in different ways, obviously. And it is probably a shame that all of us aren't going to get elected. And I know
I don't know what happens if there's a 3-way tie.
No, it might be close, but it will be interesting. But I know from my experience over the last several months, in particular campaigning with these guys, that they bring a lot to the table. I fully expect to work with either of them or both of them if I'm elected, and I fully expect to work with them if I'm not elected. I mean, I'll say that because my goal is to improve the ARRL. Obviously, I think I can do more from the inside than I can from the outside, but ARRL is important to me. It's been important since I was a teenager, and it will continue to be. So the goal here is to improve amateur radio and improve the organization that represents amateur radio to Congress and the FCC.
Thank you, Tom. Fred?
Well, after being elected last time around, and facing the prospect of being a first-time director, I asked Tom to meet with me. And I want you to know, he not only met with me, but he met with me for several hours, and he was incredibly helpful, and he is every bit the gentleman you see in front of you today. So I guess my first answer to the point is, will you work with a candidate who does not make it? The answer is yes, and I have done so in the past. And I found it incredibly useful to work with Tom in that meeting we did have. The second thing I would say is, with respect to Fred, I know that he has a special and well-practiced interest in licensing people, teaching people about amateur radio. And what I'd like to do with Fred, should I be successful, is to ask him to contribute to the materials that the ARRL uses, because if I'm correct about this, I believe he uses WB6NOA materials. And I'd like to see him work on the ARRL materials so that they would be worthy of his attention in use with youth people and all people who are training for amateur radio. So he has a particular expertise, and I think we should take advantage of it. And I'd love to see him expand on that expertise and have lots of time to do it.
Thank you very much. So, ballots have been mailed. If you're an ARRL member, you have that blue card. I mean, if you already voted, it's kind of moot, but I mean, a lot of people like myself, I don't know who I'm voting for, whatever, you have that. The ballots are due on the 19th of November. I would strongly urge you not to try to mail it on the 18th. This is the post office we're talking about. I would leave a good 2 weeks because weird things happen. And
Mitch, on that very subject, I've been hearing this weekend that a lot of people in Rhode Island and New Hampshire don't yet have ballots, and they were all mailed on the ARRL's permit number 2929, and I think you shouldn't get excited if you don't have yours yet. It is a post office problem.
Yes, and if you don't get a ballot, though, I'm sure you should call the league and let them know they may have your address wrong or something may have gotten lost. We've had some folks who didn't receive ballots get back duplicate ballots mailed. So please do take the effort to get your ballot and vote if you have it.
Thank you, Mitch. Appreciate it.
thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, everyone.
I'll be outside if anybody wants to have a follow-on discussion or question.